My heat suppressants failed on the day I had to present to the most dangerous alpha in the industry. Chapter 1. The worst morning of Park Ji-ho's professional life. Park Ji-ho had a system. It wasn't a complicated system, but it was his, and it had kept him employed, respected, and designation anonymous for 3 years at Kang Group. The system went like this: suppressants at 7 a.m. sharp, a second pill at noon, dress in layers to mask his scent, never eat lunch in the communal kitchen, and under absolutely no circumstances allow himself to feel anything in the vicinity of his alpha colleagues. Simple, effective, humiliating if he thought about it too hard, which he didn't. Today, of all days, he'd forgotten the 7 a.m. pill. He'd realized it on the subway 30 minutes into his commute, presentation notes in one hand and a coffee going cold in the other. His stomach had dropped somewhere around Gangnam Station. He told himself it was fine. One missed dose wasn't the end of the world. He had to noon pill. His cycle wasn't due for another 2 weeks. He was fine. That was at 8 a.m. It was now 10:47 and Ji-ho was standing in the elevator to the 42nd floor, the executive floor, the floor that smelled perpetually of expensive wood polish and alpha dominance and the quiet terror of people who had made very consequential decisions, and he was very much not fine. He could feel it starting at the edges, a warmth that had nothing to do with the building's heating, a faint softness in his joints. The way his own scent, normally locked tight under chemical suppression, was beginning to curl at the back of his throat like something waking up after a long sleep. Not now, he told his biology. Absolutely not today. Today was the Shin-Ryu merger presentation, 6 months of work. His work, even if Director Yoon had his name on the cover slide. Ji-ho had built every model, sourced every projection, stress-tested every assumption. He knew this deck the way he knew his own heartbeat. He could get through 90 minutes. He just had to get through 90 minutes. The elevator opened. The 42nd floor received him with its usual cold grandeur. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a view of Seoul that on any other day would make him feel like he'd earned something, and the long corridor to the main boardroom where 8 senior executives were waiting, including, according to the meeting brief that had made every analyst in the building go pale, CEO Kang Sa-jun himself. Kang Sa-jun did not attend mid-level merger presentations. The fact that he was attending this one had caused 3 separate anxiety spirals in the analytics department over the past week. Ji-ho remained calm through all of them because he trusted his numbers and he trusted his work. He had not, unfortunately, trusted himself to remember his suppressants. Ji-ho-si. Mireille from Executive Coordination fell into step beside him, tablet clutched to her chest. "They're ready for you. Director Yoon did already inside." She paused, glanced at him with a slight frown. "Are you feeling all right? You look a little—" "I'm fine," Ji-ho said pleasantly. He had a very good, pleasant face. He'd practiced it. "Thank you, Mireille." She didn't look convinced, but she pushed open the boardroom door, and there was no retreating now. The room was long, glass-walled on 2 sides, the Seoul skyline arranged behind a seated executives like a power move by the architect. Ji-ho clocked them in his peripheral vision as he walked to the presentation terminal. Director Yoon, CFO Park Chan-woo, 2 M&A department heads, a pair of Shin-Ryu representatives he recognized from the preliminary meetings, and, at the head of the table, Kang Sa-jun. Ji-ho had seen him before. Everyone who worked at Kang Group had seen him. At the company-wide meetings, he attended with the air of someone tolerating a necessary inconvenience. In the business press, where he was photographed with the expression of a man who found cameras faintly insulting. 34 years old, youngest CEO in the company's history. Alpha, obviously. The man was practically constructed from alpha genetics, broad-shouldered and immovable, with a coldness to his dark eyes that had apparently caused a competitor CFO to stammer through an entire earnings call last quarter. He was looking at his phone. Good, Ji-ho thought. Keep looking at your phone. Good morning. Ji-ho connected his laptop, pulled up the deck, and smiled at the room. Thank you all for your time. I'll be walking you through the full Shin-Ryu acquisition analysis today. Synergy projections, risk stratification, and a recommended deal structure. He clicked to the first slide. He was fine for 20 minutes. He was actually better than fine. He was good, hitting his talking points cleanly, fielding a sharp question from CFO Park about the debt-to-equity assumptions with an answer that made Director Yoon blink in surprise. Jiho had a way of delivering complicated financial information that made it feel inevitable, like the numbers had always been leading exactly here, and he could feel the room warming to the presentation even through his growing discomfort. Because the discomfort was growing. The warmth had spread from the edges to his center. His skin felt oversensitive beneath his shirt. Worst of all, his scent suppressant was clearly giving up the fight. He could smell himself, faintly sweet and soft and unmistakably Omega, and if he could smell it, then the alphas in the room could absolutely. He clicked to the synergy slide. Across the table, one of the M&A department heads, Alpha, young, the kind who'd never bothered to learn subtlety, shifted in his chair and looked up from his notes with the particular unfocused alertness of someone whose instincts had just been snagged. Jiho kept talking. His voice didn't waver. Do not look at the head of the table. Do not look at the head of the table. He looked at the head of the table. Kang Se-jun was no longer looking at his phone. He was looking at Jiho. Still and completely, the way a very controlled person looks when something has disrupted their control and they haven't yet decided what to do about it. His dark eyes were unreadable, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, a faint tension that hadn't been there before. Jiho looked back at his slides. The projected synergies over a 3-year integration window, he said in a voice that was absolutely steady, amount to approximately 340 billion won, with the highest concentration in the logistics and distribution overlap. Stop. The room went quiet. Kang Se-jun had spoken exactly one word, but it landed with the weight of a boardroom door slamming. Jiho stopped. Everyone stopped. Director Yoon looked like he was calculating how quickly he could become someone else's problem. The CEO rose from his chair. He was taller than he looked in photographs, which Jiho hadn't thought was possible. He came around the head of the table with unhurried steps, and every alpha instinct in the room seemed to go very still and very deferential without a single word being said, the way weather systems yielded to pressure fronts. He stopped at Jiho's side of the table. "Clear the room," he said. "Se-jun-si," Director Yoon started. "I said clear the room, Yoon-si. Take the Shinryu representatives to the lounge. We'll reconvene in an hour." The CEO's voice was perfectly even, perfectly cold. "Now, please." The room cleared in under 40 seconds. Jiho had counted because counting was something to do other than acknowledge that his body was in open revolt, that his face was warm, that Kang Se-jun was standing 3 feet away from him and smelled like winter. Clean and cold, and something underneath it that was purely, devastatingly alpha, and Jiho's suppressant-starved biology was making extremely unhelpful observations about this. The door clicked shut. They were alone. Kang Se-jun looked at him for a moment with those unreadable dark eyes. "When did your suppressants fail?" he said. Jiho lifted his chin. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Park Jiho-shi." The CEO said his name like a statement of fact. "I can smell you from here." Jiho's face went very warm. He held the CEO's gaze anyway, because he had not spent 3 years fighting for professional credibility to be undone by his own endocrine system without at least maintaining eye contact. "I missed a dose this morning," he said crisply. "It won't happen again. If we could continue the presentation." "You're going into preheat." "I'm managing it." "You are," Kang Se-jun said. And something in his voice had shifted. Not warmer exactly, but more textured, like the surface of something that had more underneath it than it showed. That was a competent presentation. Jiho blinked. Of all the things he'd expected the most feared alpha in Korean corporate finance to say to him in an empty boardroom, that was a competent presentation had not made the list. "Thank you," he said carefully. Kang Se-jun moved to the boardroom door, and for one absurd, hopeful moment, Jiho thought he was going to open it, going to let him leave, find a bathroom, take his noon pill, and recover what remained of his dignity. Instead, the CEO turned the lock. The click was very loud in the silent room. "What are you doing?" Jiho said. "There are 6 alphas on this floor currently," Kang Se-jun said, turning back to face him. 3 of whom have poor instinct regulation. You walked through this corridor." He paused. "You'll stay here until your situation is more stable." Jiho stared at him. "You locked the door," he said slowly. "For my safety?" "Yes." "You couldn't have just sent me home?" "The elevator requires a keycard pass on this floor, mine, and you cannot walk back through that corridor right now without attracting exactly the kind of attention neither of us wants to manage." The CEO clasped his hands behind his back, composed as if he were discussing Q3 earnings. "This is the most practical solution." Park Ji-ho looked at the locked door, looked at the CEO of Kang Group standing in the middle of the boardroom like he hadn't just upended Ji-ho's entire, carefully constructed professional life, and thought with great feeling that he should have set 3 alarms for his suppressants. "Fine," Ji-ho said. He pulled out a chair and sat down. If Kang Se-jun was surprised, he didn't show it, but something in his expression shifted. Microscopic, almost nothing, and he pulled out the chair across from Ji-ho and sat down too. Outside the glass, Seoul glittered in the morning light, indifferent to the particular catastrophe unfolding on the 42nd floor. Chapter 2. The CEO has never met anyone who argues with him like this. Se-jun had not planned for this. This was notable because Se-jun planned for everything. He ran stress scenarios the way other people made shopping lists, systematically, thoroughly, with contingencies for his contingencies. In 11 years of professional life, he had not once been caught without a response. Park Ji-ho was sitting across from him with his presentation notes, his laptop, and the expression of someone who had decided that if they were going to be humiliated, they were going to be productive about it, and Se-jun could not look away from him. This was also notable. The scent was part of it. He'd be lying to himself to claim otherwise, and Se-jun had very little patience for self-deception. An omega in preheat in an enclosed space was a biological fact that his alpha instincts had opinions about, and he was managing those opinions with the same iron control he applied to everything else. But it wasn't only the scent. He'd been watching Park Ji-ho present for 20 minutes before the situation became undeniable. He'd had no particular expectation. Mid-level analysts sent up to present merger decks were usually polished in the way corporate training made people polished, competent but replaceable. He'd planned to leave after the first 30 minutes. And then Park Ji-ho had answered Park Chan-woo's debt ratio question with 3 sentences that cut straight to the structural assumption Se-jun himself had flagged when he'd read the preliminary brief, and Se-jun had stopped looking at his phone. Now he was locked in a boardroom with the source of the most interesting answer he'd heard in 6 months and the most distracting scent he'd encountered in longer than he wanted to calculate. "The revised integration timeline in Section 4, Ji-ho said without looking up from his laptop, has a flaw." Se-jun blinked. "Excuse me?" "The 18-month assumption for logistics consolidation." Ji-ho turned his laptop to face Se-jun. "It doesn't account for the regional distribution contracts Shinryu has with 3 mid-tier carriers. Those have termination clauses that push the realistic consolidation to 24, maybe 26 months. The synergy numbers are right. The timeline is optimistic." Se-jun looked at the screen. He looked at Park Ji-ho. "You're correcting your own presentation," Se-jun said. "I'm correcting Director Yoon's timeline," Ji-ho said with a pleasant precision that made the distinction very clear. "My numbers are fine." Director Yoon will not appreciate that distinction. Director Yoon can take it up with the carrier contracts. Ji-ho pulled his laptop back and began typing something. "I flagged it in my original draft. It was revised out." Se-jun considered this for a moment. "Why are you telling me?" Ji-ho looked up then, and there was something in his dark eyes that was quite different from the carefully neutral expression he'd maintained through the boardroom presentation. Clearer, more direct. The sweet face and the steel underneath it, and it caught at something in Se-jun's chest. "Because you're the CEO," Ji-ho said simply, "and you're going to make a decision about this acquisition. You should have accurate information. Even if it reflects poorly on the team that prepared the brief. Especially then." Se-jun was quiet for a moment. "That's a dangerous way to operate." "I know," Ji-ho said, returning to his laptop. I've been told. The room settled into an odd quiet. Outside the glass walls, Sejun could see a junior assistant pass in the corridor, pause, clock that the boardroom blinds had been drawn, and very carefully continuing walking. Good. The heat situation, Jiho's situation, was not worsening. He was managing it with a visible, almost impressive self-discipline, his breathing careful, his posture contained. Sejun had given him space, taken the chair at the far end of the table from where Jiho sat, and if he was more aware of the distance between them than he had any professional reason to be, he was keeping that observation to himself. "You've been at Kang Group for 3 years, Sejun said. Jiho didn't look up. Yes. Analytics division. You were transferred from the Busan branch. A pause. Now Jiho looked up with an expression that was reassessing him. You read personnel files? I read everything relevant to the company. I'm a junior analyst. You prepared a merger brief that could direct a 2 trillion won acquisition. Sejun held his gaze. That made you relevant. Something shifted in Jiho's expression. Not quite warmth, but something that wanted to be. He suppressed it quickly, which Sejun found he noticed. The Busan transfer was my choice, Jiho said, tone carefully neutral again. Better projects. The Seoul office gets the work that actually matters. And you wanted work that mattered. Doesn't everyone? No. Most people want security, comfort, manageable expectations. Jiho tilted his head. That sounds like something someone says when they've never had to fight for either. The observation landed with the quiet confidence of someone who decided that accuracy mattered more than diplomacy. Sejun felt something that was almost, not quite amusement, but something its more interesting cousin. He couldn't remember the last time someone had said something like that to him in a professional setting, or any setting. You're right, he said. Jiho blinked. He'd clearly expected pushback. Oh. My family owns the company, Sejun said. I'm aware of what I started with. Another recalibration moved through Jiho's expression, faster this time, more nuanced. He was quick, Sejun noted. He adjusted without losing his footing. I meant, Jiho started. I know what you meant. Sejun looked at the Seoul skyline beyond the glass. It wasn't an insult, it was accurate. A beat of silence. You're strange, Jiho said, and then went pink in a way that suggested he hadn't intended to say that out loud. Sejun looked back at him. People usually don't say that to me. People are usually scared of you. And you're not. Jiho seemed to consider this with genuine seriousness, which Sejun found more interesting than a quick denial would have been. I'm a little scared of you, he admitted, but you locked a door to make sure no one would bother me, and then you let me correct my own presentation to your face. So, he shrugged, a small contained gesture. The fear is adjusting. Sejun looked at him. Park Jiho looked back, steady and a little flushed and entirely unintimidated, and Sejun became aware, with the clarity of someone who had excellent instincts and had been carefully ignoring them for the past 40 minutes, that he was in a certain amount of trouble. Not the merger kind. The other kind. The timeline correction, he said, pulling his attention back to something with clear edges. Write it up. Full analysis. Carrier contract references. Have it on my desk by end of week. Jiho stared at him. Director Yoon? Will be informed that I requested supplementary analysis. Sejun straightened. Can you do that? The steel came back in Jiho's eyes, cleaner now, certain. Yes. Good. Sejun rose and moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the lock, his back to the room, to the scent that was going to be difficult to stop thinking about. Park Jiho-shi. Yes? Take your noon pill. A long pause. I hate this floor, Jiho said with great feeling. Sejun unlocked the door and allowed himself privately the closest thing to a smile he'd had in months. Chapter 3. Kang Si-jun does not lose control. He is losing control. The supplementary analysis arrived on Si-jun's desk Thursday morning. Not emailed, not routed through Director Yoon's office, physically placed on his desk. spiral-bound, tabbed with the carrier contract appendices color-coded by termination clause type, by Park Ji-ho himself, who had apparently convinced Si-jun's executive assistant Nara to grant him a 3-minute slot between the 8 a.m. briefing and the board call, and who was now standing on the other side of Si-jun's desk, looking like he'd rehearsed exactly how long he intended to be here. The revised timeline scenarios are in Section 2, Ji-ho said. Conservative, base, and optimistic cases. The base case is 24 months. I stand by it. Si-jun looked at the document, then at Ji-ho. He'd told himself that the boardroom situation had been an anomaly, a specific set of circumstances, the scent, the enclosed space, the unexpected sharpness of the man that had produced an unusual response in him. It would not be repeated, because Si-jun did not repeat anomalies. He identified them, categorized them, and filed them somewhere they couldn't affect his decision-making. Park Ji-ho, in the ordinary light of Thursday morning, without the complicating factor of a heat situation, dressed in a gray blazer that was slightly too large for him in a way that made him look like he'd bought it for the job he intended to grow into, Park Ji-ho was not going to be filed anywhere. This was a problem. "Sit down," Si-jun said. A flicker of surprise quickly contained. Ji-ho sat. Si-jun opened to Section 2. He read. Ji-ho waited with the patience of someone who had done the work and knew it and didn't need to perform confidence about it. And that, the stillness of him, was somehow more distracting than if he'd fidgeted. "Your conservative case," Si-jun said, "you've assumed regulatory approval takes 4 months, based on the last 3 comparable acquisitions in the sector. The Shin Ryu deal has a regional employment covenant that the others didn't. Regulation might want more time." Ji-ho was quiet for a beat. Then, 5 months? Possibly 6. Another pause, shorter this time. Then the conservative case becomes 27 months and the base case holds. Ji-ho reached across the desk, stopped, glanced up. Si-jun nodded slightly. Ji-ho took a pen from the desk caddy and made a note in the margin of his own document with the ease of someone completely unbothered by annotating work in front of the person evaluating it. "I'll update the sensitivity table." "Leave it." Si-jun closed the document. "I'll have my team run the regulatory scenario. Your framework is sound." Ji-ho looked at him with the particular expression of someone receiving a compliment they absolutely earned and were still somehow surprised by. It did something inconvenient to Si-jun's chest. "Director Yoon," Ji-ho said carefully, "has been informed that I requested additional sensitivity analysis, which I did." Si-jun set the document aside. "Is there anything else, Park Ji-ho-shi?" There was something in Ji-ho's face then, a brief, unguarded moment where the careful neutrality slipped, and something more genuine moved through his expression. Something that looked almost like he wanted to say, "Why are you doing this?" He didn't say it. He stood, straightened his too large blazer, and nodded. "Thank you for your time." He left. Si-jun looked at the empty chair across from his desk for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. Then he picked up the spiral-bound document and began reading it from the beginning. By Friday, he'd read it 3 times. By the following Wednesday, he'd found 2 other reasons to request supplementary analysis from the analytics division, which both, through no deliberate arrangement on his part, landed on Ji-ho's desk. By the Wednesday after that, Nara was giving him a look he recognized as the look she reserved for things she had noted and filed for future reference, and Seijun was running 6 kilometers on the executive floor gym treadmill at 6 a.m., telling himself this was entirely manageable. It was not entirely manageable. The problem was not simply that Ji-ho was compelling, though he was, in this specific way of people who are 2 contradictory things at once, the sweetness and the steel, the pleasantness that sharpened to precision when the work required it. The problem was that Sejin's alpha instincts, which he had kept on a very short leash for the whole of his adult professional life, had apparently decided to develop opinions. He smelled Jiho before he saw him in the corridor outside the analytics division. Just a trace, suppressed, controlled, barely there. His stride broke for a fraction of a second. He kept walking. The third supplementary request came back with a cover note that said, in Jiho's neat handwriting, if the CEO has further questions about the Shinryu brief, the analyst who prepared it is available for a scheduled meeting rather than asynchronous document requests. Respectfully. Sejin read it twice. He told Nara to schedule a meeting. Jiho arrived at the 42nd floor for the second time in 3 weeks, with his suppressant taken at 7 a.m., noon pill in his pocket, and a completely different kind of nervousness than the first visit, which he was refusing to examine. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't naive, and he wasn't the type to romanticize a power imbalance. He'd spent 3 years navigating an industry that loved to make Omegas feel like they were permanently one biological incident away from not being taken seriously, and he'd built his professional armor piece by careful piece. He knew that the CEO requesting his analysis was about the work. He knew that. He also knew that he'd reread Kang Sejin's margin note, "Your framework is sound," approximately an embarrassing number of times, which was information he was keeping strictly to himself. Nara showed him into the CEO's office. It was larger than the boardroom and somehow more austere, one wall of glass overlooking the Han River, a desk that was aggressively clear except for whatever Sejin was currently working on, and no decorative elements whatsoever. It looked like an office that had been staged to communicate that the person who occupied it had no time for anything non-essential. Sejin was standing at the window when Jiho entered. He turned, and Jiho did the thing he'd trained himself to do, took the instinctive awareness of alpha, dominant, him specifically, and compressed it into a small manageable box and put that box somewhere it wouldn't affect his posture. The box was getting slightly harder to close. "Thank you for coming up," Sejin said. "You're the CEO," Jiho said pleasantly. "Technically, I can't decline. You sent a note telling me to schedule a proper meeting rather than request documents." "That was professional feedback about workflow efficiency," Jiho said. Sejin looked at him. Something in his expression had, Jiho couldn't name it exactly, but there was less distance in it than there'd been in the boardroom, like the surface of something had worn slightly thinner. "Sit," Sejin said, and moved to his desk. They worked through the regulatory scenarios for 40 minutes. It was the most intellectually engaged Jiho had felt in a professional setting in a long time. Sejin's mind was precise in a way that didn't perform its precision. He followed the logic of the models and cut straight to the structural assumptions worth interrogating, and he listened when Jiho pushed back, which he did twice with data, and Sejin changed his position both times without any of the wounded ego that usually accompanied that in senior alphas. "You're not what I expected," Jiho said during a pause while Sejin was reviewing a table. Sejin glanced up. "In what sense?" "You listen," Jiho shrugged. "Most alphas in your position have decided their instincts make them right. You change your mind when the numbers say to." A silence. Sejun set down his pen. He was looking at Jiho with an attention that had shifted from the analytical to something else, something Jiho felt across the 3 feet of desk between them. "Most Omegas in your position," Sejun said quietly, "would not have told a CEO his timeline assumptions were wrong in the first 10 minutes of their first direct interaction. I was locked in a boardroom with you. The bar for normal behavior was already gone. You did it before I locked the door." Jiho opened his mouth, closed it. He had, in fact, done exactly that. The debt ratio answer, the one that had made Park Chan-woo blink. That had been before. Sejun was watching him with those dark eyes and that worn, thin expression that kept doing things to Jiho's carefully maintained equilibrium. "I do good work," Jiho said, and his voice came out steadier than he deserved. "Someone should know." "I know," Sejun said. 3 words simply said, and Jiho's heart did something architectural, something that rearranged the interior load-bearing structure of the walls he'd spent 3 years building. He looked down at his notes. He looked at the Han River. He looked at his notes again. The regulatory timeline, he said. Yes, Sejun said, in the tone of someone who was also looking at something other than what they were thinking about. They worked for another 20 minutes. When Jiho stood to leave, Sejun stood too, automatic, and they both registered the fact of it at the same moment, that it wasn't professional habit, that it was something else, the older instinct underneath manners. Jiho felt warmth move up the back of his neck. Sejun went very still in the way he went still when he was managing something. The Shin Ryu final recommendation, Sejun said carefully. I want you to present it, to me, directly, before the board meeting. Jiho looked at him. That's Director Yoon's prerogative. I'm making it mine. Jiho should have said something measured, should have noted the professional complexity, the departmental politics, the 6 ways this could complicate his position in the analytics division. Instead, he said, when? Sejun almost, not quite, smiled. I'll have Nara schedule it. Chapter 4. A very dignified exit. It is not dignified. Jiho told himself he needed to stop going to the 42nd floor. This was a sensible, rational, professionally sound conclusion that he reached on the subway home on Wednesday evening, and thoroughly dismantled by Thursday morning when Nara's meeting confirmation arrived in his calendar. CEO office, final Shinryu recommendation, Park Jiho, Friday, 4 p.m. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened a new document and began preparing a presentation that was going to be so thoroughly excellent that there would be no ambiguity, none, zero, about whether his continued presence on the 42nd floor was about anything other than the quality of his work. He was a professional. He had a system. The system was fine. The system did not survive contact with 4 p.m. Friday. Not because anything dramatic happened. Nothing dramatic happened. And that was almost worse. Sejun was at his desk when Jiho arrived, jacket off for the first time in any of their meetings, his sleeves rolled to the forearm in the way of someone who'd been working since before Jiho had arrived and would be working after he left. And there was something so ordinarily human about it that Jiho's whole carefully constructed professional distance took a quiet hit. They went through the presentation. Sejun was sharp and focused and asked the right questions, and Jiho answered them, and at some point the conversation drifted from the deck to the acquisition philosophy behind it, and then somehow Jiho would reconstruct the exact trajectory later and still not be entirely sure how, to whether Jiho had always been interested in M&A work. I wanted to do restructuring, Jiho admitted, when I started. Turnaround work, companies that are broken and need someone to figure out why. Sejun looked at him with interest that felt genuine and therefore dangerous. Why M&A instead? Restructuring teams in Seoul don't... Jiho paused. Chose honesty over deflection because it was 5:15 p.m. on a Friday and his defenses were tired. They don't usually want omegas, the instability assumption. Distressed company environments, lots of alpha leadership on both sides. He shrugged. M&A teams are more managed, safer bet. A silence. That's a waste, Sejun said, not with heat, with the flatness of someone stating a fact they find genuinely objectionable. Jiho looked at him. You'd be exceptional at it, Sejun continued. The way you approach structural assumptions, the timeline analysis, that's a turnaround instinct. You find where things are broken. You've known me for 3 weeks, Jiho said, quietly. And I've read everything you've submitted in that time. Dark eyes, direct. I recognize good diagnostic thinking. The office was very quiet. The Han River caught the last of the afternoon light beyond the glass, and Jiho became aware, with a specificity that bypassed his usual deflection system, that he was alone with Kang Sejun at the end of a Friday, that the professional occasion that had brought him here was complete, and that there was no remaining reason to stay that wasn't something other than the merger. He began gathering his notes. I should, he started. Stay, Sejun said. One word, quiet. Not a command, not quite, though the alpha register of it resonated in the base of Jiho's spine in a way he was not going to acknowledge. Jiho looked up.
Seijin was looking back at him with the expression that had been wearing thinner all week. The distance, the professional remove, and underneath it was something Jiho recognized because he'd felt the edges of it himself. The specific problem of a feeling that had arrived without being invited and was refusing to behave. "I can't," Jiho said. "Why?" "Because..." Jiho straightened his notes, clicked his pen closed, did the small rituals of leaving with great deliberateness. "Because you're the CEO, and I need this job, and I am very good at this job, and I would like to continue being evaluated for this job based on my work and nothing else." A long silence. "That's a reasonable position," Seijin said.
I know. I'm not interested in compromising your professional standing. Something moved through Seijin's voice, careful and precise, and something else underneath. That's not... He paused, started again. That's not what this is. What is it then? Jiho asked, and hated how genuine the question sounded. Seijin looked at him across the desk. In the late light, something about his expression was undefended. Not warm, not soft, just honest in the way of someone who was not accustomed to saying the honest thing and was doing it anyway. "I don't know yet," Seijin said. Jiho's chest did the architectural thing again. He picked up his bag, he walked to the door. He was almost there, had his hand on the doorframe, when Seijin said his name. Park Jihoshi. He stopped, did not turn around. "The Shinryu presentation," Seijin said, "is the best analytical work this office has received on an acquisition of this scale in 4 years. Jiho's throat felt strange. "Thank you. I'll be speaking to the head of analytics about your project assignments." "You don't have to." "I want to." A pause. "Have a good weekend." Jiho walked to the elevator. He pressed the button. He got in. The doors closed. He leaned against the elevator wall and stared at the ceiling and thought about "I don't know yet" and Kang Seijin's careful, honest voice, and the fact that he'd said it at all, and the look on his face when he said it. The elevator opened at B2. He'd pressed the wrong floor. He was in the parking garage. He pressed 1 and waited. Get it together, he told himself at the wall of the elevator in the empty parking garage on a Friday evening. The elevator opened at the lobby. He did not have it together. But he walked out into the sole evening with his presentation notes under his arm and his suppressants in his pocket and the absolute professional intention of continuing to evaluate the situation with clear eyes and good sense. His phone buzzed. Calendar. CEO office. Project assignment discussion. Park Jiho. Monday, 9 a.m. Accepted. Jiho looked at the notification for a long moment. Then he smiled, small and private, into the collar of his coat. Monday, then. Chapter 5. The part where everything is fine. Nothing is fine. Monday's 9 a.m. meeting became a standing Monday 9 a.m. meeting. Jiho noticed this around the 3rd week, when Nara stopped sending individual calendar invites and simply said, "See you next Monday," as he left, with the serenity of someone who had processed whatever this was and made her peace with it. He appreciated Nara. She had excellent professional equanimity. He was trying to develop some of his own. It was difficult because the Monday meetings had evolved, quietly, incrementally, in the way of things that happen without being decided, from project assignment discussions to something more like strategy sessions. Seijin pulled him into thinking about deals before they were deals, asked him to read acquisition targets the way a diagnostician reads a patient, and Jiho found that his instinct for broken structures, the thing he'd been told wasn't wanted, wasn't appropriate, wasn't practical, was exactly what Seijin kept reaching for. He was doing, functionally, the job he'd actually wanted. He was also, functionally, spending every Monday morning in close proximity to the one person in Seoul whose presence his nervous system had decided to treat as a significant event, and this was taking a toll on the structural integrity of his professional armor that he was monitoring with increasing concern. The other analysts had noticed. Not the full picture. Jiho was careful, and Seijin was, if anything, more careful than Jiho. The man practically gave nothing away. But enough. Enough that Hak Young from the analytics desk had taken to making a face when Jiho's calendar notifications arrived.
enough that Director Yoon had started being precisely pleasant to Jiho and the way of someone repositioning their relationship to a moving target. "You've been reassigned," Hak-young said one Tuesday, dropping into the chair beside Jiho's desk with the authority of someone delivering important news. She was a beta, sharp-eyed, 3 years Jiho's senior, and one of the 3 people in the analytics division Jiho trusted completely. 3 projects, all routed from the executive office directly. Yoonsi's eye is twitching. Yoonsi's eye always twitches. "It's twitching at you specifically now." Hak-young tilted her head. "What's happening on the 42nd floor, Jiho, yeah?" "Work," Jiho said. "Analytical work, of a corporate nature." "You left Monday's meeting with a look on your face like someone had told you something very, I'm choosing my words carefully, affecting." Jiho arranged his expression into something serene. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "He's an alpha, Jiho. He is the CEO. Those are the relevant facts about him." Hak-young looked at him for a long moment with the expression she reserved for things she found both predictable and exasperating. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'm just going to say this once and then I'll let it go." She leaned forward. "You have worked very hard and for a very long time to be taken seriously in this building, and you are. You're genuinely exceptional, and people know it now. Just," she paused, "be careful which floor you do your exceptional work on." Jiho looked at her. "I'm always careful," he said quietly. "I know." She stood, pouted Jiho's shoulder once. "That's what worries me." He was thinking about that conversation on the following Monday when he arrived at the 42nd floor and found, instead of the usual strategic discussion setup, that Sejin was on a call that had evidently been running long. Nada directed him to a small conference room adjacent to the main office, brought him coffee he hadn't asked for, and left him with the politely resigned energy of someone who had learned to manage schedule disruptions without commentary. Jiho sat, drank the coffee, looked out at the Han River. He thought about Hak-young's words, and about the Monday meetings, and about the way Sejin's expression had developed a particular quality when he listened to Jiho work through a structural problem, intent, focused, something underneath it that Jiho had stopped pretending he didn't notice. He thought about, I don't know yet. He thought about the fact that he did know and had known for at least 2 weeks, and that this was precisely the problem. Sejin appeared in the doorway 18 minutes after the hour, jacket returned, the call tension still visible in the set of his shoulders in the way of someone who just spent time managing someone else's crisis. "Sorry," he said. This was also new, Sejin apologizing for things. The first time he'd done it, Jiho had needed a moment. "It's fine," Jiho said. "I had the river." Something in Sejin's expression softened at the edges. He sat across from Jiho and they were quiet for a moment with the ease of 2 people who had somehow, without designing it, become comfortable in each other's silences. "The Daejeon acquisition," Sejin said, pulling a folder forward. "The Daejeon acquisition," Jiho agreed. 50 minutes later, they were deep in the subsidiary structure. Jiho's notes spread across the table, Sejin's lean, long-fingered hand moving across the org chart with a pen, and Jiho was pointing at a holding entity in the lower structure that didn't match the revenue pattern above it. "Here," he said, "this subsidiary's margins are too clean. Look at the variance. It's identical quarter over quarter for 6 periods. That doesn't happen naturally." Sejin followed his finger to the chart. His arm crossed near Jiho's as he leaned to look, and the proximity registered. Warm, solid, close. And Jiho kept his eyes on the chart. "Managed figures," Sejin said. "Or the subsidiaries being used to absorb losses from somewhere else in the structure. Which means the consolidated headline looks healthy and the real exposure is buried." Jiho pulled the folder back. "You need to forensic audit the subsidiaries before you know what you're actually buying." Sejin was looking at him, not the chart. "I'll have legal flag it," he said, and his voice had that texture again, the not quite warmer quality. "You identified a potential fraudulent subsidiary structure in under an hour." Sejin, see. He heard himself use the name without the title and felt the air in the room change register slightly. I'm serious. There are protocols. There are people above me whose professional dignity requires...
I am aware of the protocols, Sejun said, quiet even. I'm also aware that the most useful person in that meeting will be you. The two things are in tension. I'm choosing between them. Jiho looked at him. You can't just... He stopped, breathed. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? Saying things like that. The words came out before his filter caught them, more honest than he'd intended. Like it's simple, like it doesn't complicate things. Sejun went still in the particular way he went still when he was paying complete attention. I'm not trying to simplify it. Then what are you trying to do? The silence stretched. I'm trying, Sejun said, slowly, with the carefulness of someone selecting each word from a limited and valuable supply, to stop pretending that my interest in you is purely professional. The Han River moved outside. Seoul existed. Jiho's heart did something complicated. That, Jiho said, is significantly more complicated than a Thursday meeting. I know. My position in this company would not be affected. You can't promise that. I can. I'm the CEO. That's not... Jiho pushed back from the table. He needed space. He needed the 3 feet of conference table and possibly several floors of building between him and the expression on Kang Sejun's face, which was doing something unprecedented. Open, uncertain, genuinely uncertain. The control still there but frayed at the edges in a way that made Jiho want to close the distance instead of increase it, which was precisely why he needed the distance. He stood up. I need to think, he said. All right, Sejun said. I need to go back downstairs and think and be professional and look at spreadsheets. All right, Sejun said, still in the same quiet voice. Jiho picked up his notes, his folder, his bag. This is a situation that requires thought, careful thought, considered thought. Yes. Stop agreeing with me. Would you prefer I argue? I'd prefer... Jiho stopped at the door, turned. I'd prefer you were easier to be sensible about. Sejun looked at him across the conference table. In the afternoon light, something in his face was completely unguarded, and Jiho saw it, the whole of it, the feeling that had been wearing through the professional surface for weeks. It was careful and enormous, and clearly been managed with great discipline for longer than Sejun intended to admit. Sejun left. He made it all the way to the elevator before he stopped walking.
Chapter 6. Park Ji-ho pushes back. Kang So-jun has met his match. He thought about it for 4 days. This was not the clean, rational analysis process he'd promised himself. It was messy and nonlinear and involved a 40-minute conversation with Hak-young on Wednesday evening, in which he said almost nothing explicit and she understood everything anyway, and simply held her coffee cup and said, well, that's a situation, which was more comforting than it had any right to be. He thought about his career, which he had built with intention and sacrifice and 2 years of eating convenience store food to make rent on a salary that hadn't caught up to his actual contribution yet. He thought about what it had cost him to be taken seriously in a building full of alphas who looked at his designation first and his work second. He thought about how long he had maintained the system, 7 a.m., noon, layers, no communal kitchen, to keep the two things separate, his biology and his professional identity, because mixing them had never been safe. He thought about the most useful person in that room will be you. He thought about, I'm trying to stop pretending my interest is purely professional. He thought about an ice-cold CEO rolling up his sleeves on a Friday afternoon and changing his position on a regulatory timeline because the data said to. On Thursday, he went to the Daejeon due diligence meeting. He sat in the back. He said nothing for the first hour, which was difficult because the lead counsel was building a liability framework on top of an assumption about the subsidiary structure that Jiho had already identified as potentially compromised, and every minute of it was making the analytical part of his brain twitch. So-jun was at the head of the table. He did not look at Jiho more than he looked at anyone else. He was impeccably professional, and Jiho had enough context now to recognize what that cost him.
In the second hour, the CFO introduced the consolidated financial summary. Jiho looked at the numbers, looked at them again. He raised his hand. Across the table, he felt more than saw the moment Sojun went still. Park Ji-ho-shi? The CFO said, with the particular inflection of someone who noticed he was junior and was being polite about it. The Q4 subsidiary figure, page 12, it's been consolidated net of an intercompany loan that isn't disclosed in the footnotes. The gross exposure is approximately 40 billion won higher than this summary reflects. Silence. That's, the lead counsel started. Page 47 of the data room, the intercompany schedule, third entry. Documents shuffled. Someone pulled up a laptop. The silence changed quality, from dismissive to the particular charged stillness of a room that has just understood it nearly missed something significant. Sojun was silent, but across the table, something in the set of his shoulders communicated, there it is, with complete clarity to anyone paying attention. Jiho was paying attention. The meeting ran an extra 90 minutes while the legal re-evaluated the liability framework. Jiho answered 4 follow-up questions from people whose titles were several levels above his pay grade, and he answered them the way he always answered things, clearly, with data, without performing either confidence or deference. When the room cleared, Sojun stayed. Jiho stayed too, gathering his papers, taking his time about it, aware of the room emptying around them. Page 47, Sojun said, when the last person had gone. It was there, Jiho said. Someone had to say it. You've been thinking, Sojun said, not a question. Jiho looked at him across the cleared conference table. I've been thinking, he confirmed. And? Jiho set down his papers, crossed his arms. He'd rehearsed approximately 6 versions of this, and all 6 had been careful and measured and had sounded, when he reviewed them mentally, like someone trying to sound like they weren't terrified. He abandoned all 6. I'm going to say things, Jiho said, and you're going to listen, and you're not going to interrupt, and then you can respond. Agreed? Something moved through Sejan's expression. Surprise, and something that was trying not to be the opposite of cold. Agreed? Good, Jiho breathed. I worked extremely hard to be here. Not on this floor, in this building, in this city, in a role where what I produce is the thing people see first. I gave up the work I actually wanted because it felt safer to be good at something they'd let me do. I take my suppressants at 7 a.m. every morning, and I eat lunch at my desk, and I keep everything, he touched 2 fingers to his sternum, very tightly managed, because the moment anyone in this industry looks at me and thinks Omega first instead of analyst first, I've lost something that takes months to rebuild. He held Sejan's gaze. You need to understand that before anything else. That's not context. That's the whole situation. Sejan was watching him with complete stillness, complete attention. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not done. Jiho uncrossed his arms. You specifically are, someone whose attention is very difficult to dismiss, and I have tried. I tried the professional distance and a technical framing, and telling myself that what I was feeling was just gratitude or ambition or displaced professional regard or whatever the most sensible explanation was. He paused. It wasn't any of those things. The room was very quiet. I know that, Sejan said. I said I wasn't done. Sejan closed his mouth. If this, Jiho gestured between them, is something, if that's what you're telling me, then it can't exist here, in this building, in office hours. Whatever it is has to be completely separate from my work, because my work is not negotiable. My credibility is not negotiable. I am not going to become someone who got interesting projects because of who he's seeing. His voice was steady. He was proud of how steady it was. If you can't do that, if the 2 things can't be completely separate, then I'd rather go back to being a junior analyst who submits documents through Director Yoon and sees you once a year at the company meeting. Silence. Sejan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, The project assignments. Were they because of my work? Yes, entirely. Will they continue to be? Yes, no hesitation. Even if I walked out of this room and said I wasn't interested. A beat. Something moved through Sejan's expression, a flicker of something genuine and slightly wounded. Yes, he said. The work stands on its own. It always has. Jiho looked at him. Okay, Jiho said. Okay, which part? Okay, I believe you. Jiho picked up his papers. His heart was doing things he wasn't going to document. And, okay, not the other part. Not yet. He met Sejan's gaze. You have been very controlled, very careful about all of this, and I know that's not easy for you because you're not someone who, he paused, chose the word, wants things often or admits it. Sejan's jaw was very slightly taut. I want to know what you're like when you're not managing it, Jiho said simply. I want to know who you are when you're not the CEO, and I think that takes longer than 6 weeks of Monday meetings. He adjusted his bag on his shoulder. So, take me to dinner, not a meeting, not a working lunch. Dinner, somewhere that has nothing to do with this building, and we'll see. Sejan stared at him. Park Jiho, junior analyst, sweet face and spine of steel, had just told the most feared alpha in Korean corporate finance to take him to dinner and prove himself. The expression that moved across Kang Sejan's face then was something Jiho suspected very few people had ever seen. Open, somewhat undone, and underneath everything, genuinely delighted. Friday, Sejan said. 7 o'clock. Jiho nodded. He turned to leave. Park Jiho Sishi. He turned back. Sejan was looking at him with those dark eyes and that face that had learned slowly to show him more than it showed anyone else. For what it's worth, he said quietly, it was always the work, from the first answer you gave in that boardroom. Jiho's chest did the architectural thing. The walls shifted. I know, Jiho said. That's why I'm saying yes. He walked out, down the corridor, into the elevator. When the doors closed, he leaned his head back against the wall, looked at the ceiling, and allowed himself, privately, alone, in a skeel box between floors, a smile so wide it nearly hurt. Friday, then.
Chapter 7. The Dinner, and Everything That Comes After Honesty. The restaurant Sejan chose was not what Jiho expected. He'd prepared himself for somewhere architectural and silent, the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the lighting was designed to communicate that everyone present had made excellent financial decisions. The kind of place a CEO took someone to demonstrate resources. Instead, the car stopped in front of a small place in Yeonnam-dong. Warm light through the window, no sign except a handwritten board, the kind of neighborhood restaurant that existed because someone loved cooking and didn't need anyone to know about it. Jiho looked at it, looked at Sejan. My executive assistant did not recommend this place, Sejan said, reading his expression. I found it myself. When? 3 years ago. I come here when I need... He paused, selected the word. Quiet. Jiho looked at the restaurant again. Something in his chest rearranged itself. Okay, he said, and got out of the car. It was small inside, 8 tables, run by a couple in their 60s who greeted Sejan with the easy familiarity of people who knew him as a regular rather than a CEO, and who seated them in the corner without being asked, and brought makgeolli without being asked, and left them alone with the same instinct. Jiho watched all of this and thought, there he is. Not the version that cleared boardrooms with a single word, not the version with the immovable shoulders and the eyes that made junior analysts rehearse what they were going to say before the elevator reached the 42nd floor. This was someone who ate at a neighborhood restaurant alone often enough that the owners knew his corner, who ordered the braised pork because it was what the restaurant did best, rather than what looked appropriate, who poured Jiho's makgeolli before his own with an ease that suggested it was instinct. You're different here, Jiho said. Sejan looked up. Is that bad? No. Jiho wrapped both hands around his cup. It's interesting. You're still you, but the part of you that's managing everyone else isn't running. It's running a little. With me? A pause. Less than usual, Sejan said. Less than with anyone, actually. Jiho considered that. Why?
Sejun was quiet for a moment in the way of someone who spent so much of their life in rooms where honesty had strategic consequences that uncomplicated truthfulness required a slight recalibration. Because you don't want anything from me. Not access, not favor, not... He turned his cup in his hands. Everyone in my professional life wants something from me. It's not cynical, it's just structure. That's how it works. Dark eyes, direct. You told me to earn dinner. You told me your work wasn't negotiable. The first time we spoke, you corrected me. I corrected Director Yun's timeline. You told me about it immediately, to my face. Something warm moved at the edge of his expression. Do you know how rarely that happens? People are scared of you.
People are scared of the position. They tell me what they think I want to hear. He looked at Jiho across the small table. You told me my conservative scenario needed 6 months instead of 4. It did. I know, that's the point. Jiho looked at him. That's a low bar, Sejun C. Someone arguing with you with data. Sejun, he said, not Sejun C, not tonight. Jiho's heart did something quiet and significant. Sejun, he repeated, and watched something in the other man's expression settle, like a word arriving home. It's not a low bar, Sejun said, returning to the thread. It's extremely rare. And you do it while being... He paused. A muscle moved in his jaw, the expression of someone about to say a thing they've been carefully not saying. While being the most... Another pause. Jiho could see him choosing, weighing, the control still there, but choosing honesty over protection. You walk into a room and the entire register changes for me. That has never happened before. The restaurant hummed quietly around them. The owners moved in the kitchen. Seoul existed outside. Never? Jiho said. Never. Sejun met his eyes. Not like this. Jiho breathed in slowly. You kept all of this very controlled. I was trying to be appropriate. You locked a boardroom door the first time we met. For your safety. And then you couldn't stop requesting my analysis. It was excellent analysis. Sejun, Jiho said, his name, and watched him react to it again, that small involuntary settling. It's excellent, I know it was. I'm saying you also couldn't stop. A long pause. No, Sejun said, I couldn't. The admission sat between them, honest and a little raw, and Jiho felt the last of his own careful management, the professional distance he'd been manicuring for 6 weeks, go quiet. I hid my designation for 3 years in that building, not from dishonesty, he searched for it, from wanting to be seen as the thing I actually am before anything else, the analyst, the work. He looked at his cup. And then you stood in a boardroom and cleared everyone out and locked the door and spent 40 minutes letting me correct my own presentation. And the first thing you said about it was that it was competent, and... He stopped. And, Sejun said very quietly, and I've been in trouble since then. Jiho looked up. I want you to know that, since that first day, I just needed to make sure I knew why. Sejun was looking at him across the table with that undefended face, the one Jiho had seen for the first time in the conference room and had been thinking about since. Open, enormous, carefully held. Do you know why? He asked. Yes, Jiho said simply. Because you see the work first, because you listen, because you're different here in this corner than anywhere else, and you brought me here and not somewhere you were performing for me. He paused. And because you looked at the most embarrassing morning of my professional life and your first instinct was to protect me from it. Sejun reached across the small table. His hand rested, light and careful, over Jiho's where it wrapped around the cup. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Jiho looked at their hands and thought about 7 a.m. suppressants and lunch at his desk and 3 years of careful management and how it felt right now to simply let his biology and his professional self and the thing he felt when he looked at this man exist in the same room without apology. It felt like something he hadn't known he was holding, finally set down.
Tell me something no one at Kang Group knows about you, Jiho asked. Seijun blinked. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth moved. I wanted to be an architect. Jiho stared. Seriously?
My grandfather built the company. My father ran it. The conversation about what I would do with my life was not a slight pause, the old careful surface and something more rueful underneath it, particularly open. Do you regret it? Seojun thought about this with the seriousness he brought to everything. No, I'm good at what I do. He looked at Jiho. But I look at buildings. When I'm in a city, I notice the structural choices. Jiho thought about a man who read everything about the companies that crossed his desk, who built acquisition frameworks the way someone else might design load-bearing systems, who noticed when things were structurally compromised before anyone else saw it. You're doing it anyway, he said, just with companies instead. Seojun looked at him for a moment. Then, fully, for the first time in Jiho's experience, he smiled. Not the barely there movement at the corner, but something genuine and slightly surprised, like the expression of someone who has just been shown something about themselves they'd missed. Jiho felt it land somewhere deep and warm and permanent. There you are, he thought. There you are. They stayed until the restaurant began quietly preparing to close, the owners moving around them with the tact of people who had seen enough to know when two people needed the last corner of the evening. Outside, the Yeonnam-dong street was cool and softly lit, the kind of neighborhood that felt like the city had turned its volume down. They walked without a particular destination, unhurried, close enough that their shoulders brushed twice, and neither of them moved away. The merger recommendation. The board meeting is in 3 weeks. I know. Jiho glanced up at him. Are you asking if this, he indicated the street, the evening, the impossible situation of the two of them, changes the work? No, I know it doesn't. Then why bring it up? Seojun was quiet for half a block. Because after the board meeting, the Shin Ryu acquisition is complete, and you won't have a direct reason to be in my office every Monday. Jiho looked at him. I was going to talk to the head of analytics about a secondment to corporate strategy. It would be... Don't, Jiho said. Seojun stopped walking. Don't arrange it, Jiho said, turning to face him. Not yet, not like that. Let me do it the right way. Let me apply. Let me build the case. Let me earn the transfer. He held Seojun's gaze. I need to know I got there because I'm good enough. You are good enough. I know I am. I need the record to show it. A long pause. Seojun looked at him with that expression that understood him since a boardroom on a morning that was supposed to be a disaster. All right, he said. Thank you. Jiho breathed out, started walking again. Seojun fell into step beside him. Their hands brushed, once, and then Seojun's fingers found his, careful, a question, and Jiho turned his hand over and answered it. They walked the rest of the street like that, quiet and unhurried, Seoul moving around them. Chapter 8. Everything he is. The walls come down. The board meeting was a Thursday. Jiho presented the final Shinryu recommendation to the full board, 12 people, the highest stakes room of his professional life. And he was good. He was better than good. He was the version of himself he'd been working towards since the Busan branch, since convenience store dinners, since 7 a.m. suppressants and careful and visible labor, and he felt it in the room. The quality of the attention, the questions that engaged rather than tested, the moment when the board chair looked at Park Chan-woo and something passed between them that Jiho translated with reasonable confidence as where did this one come from? He answered the final question. He thanked the room. He did not look at Seojun during the presentation. Not once. It was the hardest professional discipline he'd ever exercised, and when he walked out of that boardroom for the last time, he allowed himself, in the elevator, 30 seconds of absolute private triumph before reassembling his composure.
Seojun found him 20 minutes later on the 42nd floor terrace, an outdoor space off the main corridor that most people didn't know existed. Small and glass-railed, the Han River visible between buildings in the middle distance. Jiho had discovered it in week 2 of the Monday meetings on an early arrival when Nara had been on a call, and he'd been coming here for the last hour of Friday afternoons for 3 weeks to decompress before the commute home. He hadn't told Seojun. He wasn't particularly surprised that Seojun knew. The man read everything about things that mattered to him. The board approved it, Seojun said, coming to stand beside him at the rail. Unanimous. I know, I could tell in the room. Park Chan-woo wants to know who supervised your work. What did you say? That you supervised your own work. A pause. He looked appropriately unsettled by that. Jiho looked at the river. It's done then. The acquisition, yes. And the Monday meetings? Seojun was quiet beside him, close enough that Jiho could feel the warmth of him even in the autumn air. Jiho, he said. Not Park Ji-ho-si, not the professional construction. Jiho turned to look at him. Seojun was facing the river, his hands on the rail, the afternoon light doing something honest to his face. The control was still there. It was always there. It was architecture. It was load-bearing, but it was bearing a different weight now, and the expression underneath it was the one Jiho had been given slowly, piece by piece, over weeks of Monday mornings and one Friday dinner in a corner restaurant in Yeonnam-dong. I have spent 12 years being very precise about the distance I keep between what I feel and what I allow. Then he turned and looked at Jiho directly, and then you walked into a boardroom and corrected the timeline and looked at me like I was supposed to justify myself, and I have not recovered from it. Jiho's chest ached quietly. You seemed very recovered. You seemed extremely composed. I was working very hard. How hard? I read your personnel file the same afternoon. Something in his expression acknowledged the ridiculousness of this without apology. Your Busan project assessments, your transfer application, your full analytical history at this company. I told myself it was due diligence. About a junior analyst? About you. His voice was level and completely undefended. It was always specifically about you. Jiho looked at him. 3 years of 7 a.m. suppressants, 3 years of eating alone and dressing in layers and building walls so carefully that they'd started to feel like his actual shape. 3 years of being excellent at something he'd chosen partly because it felt safe, of leaving the work he'd wanted in some future where the conditions were right and the ground was solid and he'd earned enough credibility to take the risk. He looked at Kang Seojun, who had read his personnel file and changed his position on regulatory timelines and brought him to a corner restaurant and held his hand in the street, who had cleared a boardroom to protect him and never once looked at him like a designation before a person. He thought about conditions being right. He thought about solid ground. You know what I realized, Jiho said, about 3 days after that first meeting? What? That you weren't going to do anything about it. He watched Seojun's expression. Not without explicit invitation. You were just going to stand there, being exactly what you are, and wait because you were terrified of, he searched for it, of being someone who used a position to... Yes, Seojun said, quiet. That's when I knew, Jiho said simply. Seojun looked at him. An alpha who's afraid of his own power over someone is a different thing, a rare thing. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them by half. I've been careful my whole professional life about what I let myself want. I'm done being careful about this. The air between them changed. Seojun's hand came up slowly, giving him every opportunity to move away, and cupped the side of his face, warm, careful, enormous and restrained all at once. His thumb traced the line of Jiho's cheekbone with a tenderness that had clearly been managed for a very long time. Jiho, he said. Just his name. Everything in it. I know, Jiho said. Me too. Seojun kissed him like he did everything, with complete attention, with no wasted movement,
with the particular quality of someone finally allowing themselves the thing they've been precise about wanting. Jiho kissed him back with his hands in Seojin's lapels and his carefully maintained professional distance folding away like something that had done its job and was no longer needed. When they separated, Seojin rested his forehead against Jiho's. His eyes were closed, and the expression on his face was the most undefended thing Jiho had ever seen on a human being. Something washed clean of control and distance and the weight of 12 years of precision. "Jiho," he said, low, certain. "I want to do this properly. Not a secret, not a complication to manage." "I know." Jiho turned his face into the warmth of Seojin's palm. "I want that too." "The strategy secondment. I'll apply myself, through the right channels." "I know you will. HR will need to be informed. Of us." "I know." Director Yoon's eye will twitch. Jiho laughed, genuine, uncalculated, the kind that surprised him with its own lightness. He felt Seojin exhale against his hair, a sound that was almost but not quite a laugh, the version of one that had forgotten it was allowed. "Let it twitch," Jiho said.
6 months later. The corporate strategy team received a new analyst via internal transfer, Park Ji-ho, formerly of analytics, whose application had been evaluated by the department head without any input from the CEO, and whose hire had been recommended unanimously by the selection committee based on a portfolio that included, among other things, a subsidiary fraud identification that had saved the Daejeon acquisition from a 40 billion won liability. His first day, he took the elevator to the 22nd floor. Corporate strategy, not the 42nd, sat at his new desk and began reading the active deal pipeline. His suppressants were in his desk drawer, taken at 7 a.m. His lunch was also in his desk drawer, because old habits. At noon, his phone buzzed. KS. Dinner tonight, the Yeolnam Dong place, 7 p.m. Then, after a moment, KS. You don't have to say yes because I'm the CEO. Jiho smiled at his phone in the middle of the corporate strategy open floor, and several of his new colleagues exchanged glances. Jiho, I know. Yes. He put his phone away and opened the first deal file. The work was excellent. The ground was solid. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. The end. And that's the end of Jiho and Sergeant's story. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. It truly means everything. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Tell me your favorite moment. I read every single one. And if you don't want to miss the next audiobook, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so YouTube actually lets you know when I upload. I have more stories coming. More pining alphas, more fierce omegas, more corporate chaos, and you do not want to sleep on them. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.